Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, Taking SIM to the Cloud, a SANS review of Securonix Next-Gen SIM, sponsored by Securonix. My name is Carol Off of the SANS Institute, and I will be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speakers are Dave Shackleford, SANS Analyst and Instructor, and Nitin Agale, Securonix SVP of Product. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenters, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Dave.
Awesome. Thanks, Carol. And hey, thanks everybody for being here with us today. And I'm always excited to be able to sort of come to you guys and talk about things I actually got my hands on and sort of had the opportunity to explore, especially as it pertains to critical areas of security controls that all of us really need to have a vested interest in. And I think this is certainly one of them. I think we've gone from looking at something like a security event and sort of information management platform as a nice to have. It's really a must have today, and truly represents the nerve center of security operations. So I'm really excited to be able to talk to you guys about my review of Securonix, because there's some cool stuff here. There's some really innovative technology and really interesting capability sets that I explored as part of the review. And so I'm going to go and sort of walk you guys through that, what I found, the kinds of things that I sort of went through, and again, just my overall impression of the platform itself. So let's go ahead and jump right in. And so, of course, again, I'm going to be joined by Nitin. I'm going to hand things off to him a little bit later on and allow him to sort of give you guys a deeper dive into some of the company and the product itself and the platform. And, that'll sort of complement everything that I'm going to be telling you guys as far as my experience went. And so let's just jump right in and sort of set the stage. This is my general introduction to the topic, which probably doesn't need one. I think we all sort of know what the big issues are today. This isn't really a secret. We're drowning in a lot of data. And I always laugh coming from a long-standing experience as a security analyst and a security operations professional, when I recall distinctly the early days where we couldn't get enough data. Like, we had to go beg people for event data and logs and, all these different things. And hey, we've gotten our wish, but it's sort of a double-edged sword, because a lot of the traditional types of security event management technologies just can't keep up with this stuff at all. And so what we found is that, things are slowing down. You're trying to piece together and sort of knit together these stories and tell better stories about events within the environment with technology that really was never built to do that. And so what we're seeing now, of course, is the emergence of true security analytics platforms and, sort of large, massive scale data sets that can be rapidly analyzed, correlated, and put together in a way that helps us tell those stories, which is really what we need for our security analysts. We don't have enough time. We don't have enough people. We need better tools. And while tools are only one aspect of this, in the case of something like a SIM platform, they're just unbelievably critical. You just can't really do the job without having a platform that can scale with you and allows you to find those needles in those haystacks. And so when we looked at the Securonix Next-Gen SIM, really, I was looking for, number one, scalability and performance. And I'm going to speak to that here in just one second. But in terms of just the day-to-day usage, the practical aspects of getting your hands in there as an analyst of whatever tier. So this is tier 1 all the way up through sort of like lead analysts that run SOC teams. I want to find out how much the product can help me. In other words, I don't want to have to go figure everything out myself. I want the product to do some of the work and be intelligent enough to say, hey, we've seen this before. Hey, this has been something that we've noted multiple times, or it's been seen in other people's environments, and bring some of that intelligence to me. So this is all about things like machine learning and the analytics capabilities. It's ease of use. A SIM that is hard to use is a terrible SIM. And so you've got to have a SIM that somebody can jump in and start making use of quickly. I need to look for things quickly. I need to be able to find stuff and get answers back rapidly. And I also want to be able to tie that into deeper analysis and also the kickoff of an incident that I declare and start, potentially correlating with other information and data One of the really cool things that I'll mention here as we go through this, which I think sort of differentiates the Securonix folks and sort of stands out a bit in my opinion, is some really cool orchestration and response capabilities that are built into the product too. And that was sort of like a bonus. In fact, when I started really kind of digging down into things and saw that, I said, well, this is nice, because if you don't currently have security orchestration and response built into your environment, you haven't engaged or sort of invested in another tool set to be able to help with that, this can do some of that for you. And that's really nice today, again, given that we're just drowning in all this data and we need things to go faster than ever before. So that was my intro. Let me just speak to the scalability, and I really am only speaking to it because we didn't do that kind of a test. So in our analyst approaches here, we don't set things up in such a way that we're capable of really monitoring at an accurate and finite level of detail things like ingestion rates and so forth. But the Securonix team really was great about giving us extraordinarily detailed research and configuration that they had put together as part of their own reviews. And so this is just some information for you guys. And the way I look at this too, no vendor, no product provider or service provider has a vested interest in lying to you. So my thing is, you can test this yourself and very easily find out whether it's capable of doing so. And I will tell you, my experience just from using the product is that it was fast. And I certainly saw lots and lots and lots of disparate data sources and huge volumes of events. But if you want more information about the specific types of testing that this team did and that got to some of this data you see here on the slide, they've got all that published and available for you guys. And so I just wanted to note it here. I think it is important, especially for large enterprises that are dealing with this volume. This is a major factor for you. And so I just want to be clear, SANS did not go through any sort of rigorous testing, but we did review the information that the Securonix team gave to us. And this just shows you some of the architectural elements of that. So if you're looking at the product and you sort of want to get a sense of how things were put together, I think this probably tells that story pretty well. And again, there's lots of documentation, and Nitin will speak to that when I hand things over to him. They've got an enormous capability for scale. And so, there's Hadoop as sort of the engine of data processing here. You've got ingestion capabilities coming in with Kafka. You've got lots of different infrastructure services tied into things. You've got all these various data sources. There's a really cool architecture story here, but that's something that you guys would, probably have to go follow up on your own. I did read through it. I thought it was really cool and certainly very progressive technologically. But what I was more concerned with was the use cases and the day-to-day operations aspects. And so that's what I'm going to start with here. And the way I always start looking at a SIEM product, and having spent a lot of time in SOCs and still spend a lot of time in SOCs for what that's worth, this is where I always go is, what's the dashboard, right? What's the dashboard look like? How flexible is it? It's going to be the thing you stare at as an analyst a lot. How quickly can I use this to, number one, spot things that are interesting in the environment and have those bubble up and be prioritized in a way that's readable and usable? And then number two, take that information and quickly dive deeper and use it to actually do some things. And so what you see here is really just the sort of starting point for the whole thing. It's that front end dashboard, which is totally customizable, by the way. And in our related paper that we're publishing here with this webcast, I go into a little more detail about setting up widgets and sort of changing up the way the interface looks and things. I'm not going to really get into that too much here, but needless to say, you can customize this as you want to show particular things or not. And naturally, if I'm an analyst, my starting point is typically going to be, top threats, top violators, top issues that we see in the environment. And especially when it comes to user activity, as we all know that end user systems and end users themselves are almost invariably a major element of ingress for attackers and sort of that starting point for the attack types we're seeing now. That's where I want to go. I want to find out who has been spotted numerous times misbehaving, or their account is being abused in some way. I want to find the perception of the top threats that has been found and discovered in the environment based on the event data feeding into the platform. And so these are the kinds of things that I think any analyst can say, yeah, of course, that's my natural go-to as a starting point. And we found it incredibly simple to just jump right in and dig into that. So where we went first was top threats. I just want to see what the heck is going on, and sort of find something. And there's a huge data set, by the way, that we had ingested into this test environment. And so you'll see that this has been getting processed for like a full year. So there's tons and tons of stuff in here, and we really found the juicy ones to go dig into. But we started with a simple example, and what we wanted to find out was how quickly can I jump in and search on this stuff? How can I just find something of interest that is ranked in a priority fashion as something of interest, right? So, hey, this is a big one, go jump in, find it, do something about it. And so we started with the top threats and looked for the classification of advanced cyber threat. And there's a whole series of different categorizations and things that the Securonix team has documented. This was one that felt right to just kind of kick the whole thing off with, because it allowed us to do a very simple search, find something in that massive data set that matched this, and then dig into it. So naturally, this is our starting point. We found a threat, we found something interesting, it had a reasonable severity level associated with it, and we clicked in and sort of off and running, started digging into the details. We'll come back to that in a minute, because we went through some really cool use cases as part of this review, and allowed us to dig deep, start correlating, do really cool queries, bundle together data sets, you name it, we probably did it. And what we looked at here is sort of the background of the organization. Now, some of you guys might be familiar with Securonix, and I won't steal Mitten's thunder because he'll tell you the whole story in just a bit. But this is an organization that has extraordinarily deep background experience in analytics and really large-scale event processing, particularly around user and sort of event behavior related to users, and doing analytics around that, which we all know is an incredibly complex space that necessitates just enormous scale of data processing. And so they bring that to the table and essentially decided, hey, look, we can expand that capability set to really encompass any type of data set or ingestion capability from security products and events and things to tell more stories than just what the users are up to. And so they've got a really great sort of, set of use cases that are out of the box for obviously insider threats. I mean, things that are related to the user side, they have years and years of experience in. So it's account misuse and compromise. It's, again, those insider threats, but it's been expanded significantly to accommodate for much more advanced scenarios that deal with, sort of the APT style threats that we're dealing with. Advanced actors, whether criminal or nation state or both. Things like application security issues. They've got, entire use cases that are built out for this. They've got sort of the analytics around access and access management. So seeing what's been accessed where, from who, whatsoever. And then, of course, even bringing in some cloud security too. So if you're pulling in event data from, say, AWS CloudTrail or, Microsoft Azure in terms of their Azure activity logs and so forth, they've got some of those capabilities too. So it's awesome to see this coming together, because it's built on that basis of really deep dive, massive scale data processing. And so we took a look at some of the different use cases that these guys had. We followed through with some specific ones in the environment based on the test bed that they had created. And I think, as you guys will find here in just the next few slides that I go through, they really do sort of match up with things that we would want to find out in reality. So I was looking for sort of the realism aspect in the use cases that we went through, and I think we put together some pretty cool ones for you. So again, here we go. The SOC dashboard, we're in there, we're sort of checking this out. They've got a couple different dashboard variations that are suggested sort of starting points or use cases for different types of teams. The SOC dashboard is probably the most prevalent or useful, in my opinion, for your average sort of security operator, because it gives you, again, those top threats, those top violators, sort of the big picture things that we all want to know. And so we started back into our advanced cyber threat category, but this time, as you can see in the slide, we sort of dug in. So we didn't just look at the categorization listing. We clicked on it, dug down into some of the details. And what you can see here is, of course, sort of when it happened and the description of this and, sort of the interpretation of the event based on Securonix's analysis engine in the background and some of the different threat indicators that went along with this. And what we really want to dig down into now is that bottom part of the pane, which says, hey, here's the series of things that concatenated together comprise this event, right? It's not just an advanced cyber threat as a lone data point within the environment. It's a series of things that go together and seem related that comprise that threat, and that's what you need to dig into. And of course, what we're really trying to find out is, where did it start? So, naturally, any incident responder will tell you the root cause is a pivotal thing to really focus on here. And number two, how did this thing happen, right? What was the process from where an attacker potentially gained that initial access and then took it to the next level and the next level and lateral movement and potential exfiltration or whatever actually happened. So that's what we're seeing down at the bottom, is this threat chain that shows us the initial case that started off the whole thing and then where it went. And so we dug in a little bit, right? And that's where we'll go again as part of our use cases. One of the things that we liked, and we didn't really explore this to the full extent just based on time and certainly the scope of the assessment, but we did take a look at some of those capabilities and really explored them a little bit. The response capabilities, which is cool, meaning instead of just being sort of a passive monitoring element here, hey, I'm the SOC and we're taking a look at things. This is a full scope SOC and response product in the sense that the SOC operators can hand things off to response teams, or even, if you've got more of an integrated team, allows you to do things like whitelisting events, adding it to a watch list so you can continually monitor. You can mark it as being sort of a false positive. You can, open an investigation immediately. You can mark it as in progress during an investigation if it happens as part of this. And so you've got this take action button that's specifically associated with any of the events, and it allows you to very quickly actually do something about it. So you can tie it into investigations, you can start new investigations. Any SIEM should be able to do this, but the faster it is and the easier it is, the better, because what you don't want to do is have to hunt around and figure out various pieces and parts when you're in the middle of a firefight or maybe a potential firefight. And so I liked the fact that this was right there. It was super easy to get to. And, you could easily see how an integrated team would start making use of this. So going back to our use case, and, this particular use case, to me, just feels, it feels all too familiar because it's just what's happening out there today. We just see so much of this. And so we started off with an email, as so many things do, right? We've got email that's coming in and there's something bad going on in said email. And so what we looked at here was this, sort of maybe recon type email that had something in it that was enticing you to click on a link or what have you, or included an attachment. And of course, attackers are sending these things out trying to get you to, click or open the attachment, and then, they're going to follow up later. And so this started off with some recon. We looked at the later stages of an attack chain during this incident. We see that there was a suspicious Windows login that happened afterward. We saw some processes that seemed suspicious as part of the attack chain that likely culminated from the exploitation phase. We saw some beaconing out for, C2 channels. We saw lateral movement happening with new service creation and then a share access. And then, of course, the culmination of this scenario, which is what most attackers are ultimately trying to get at, which is your data. They want to get access to something and then send it along somewhere else. And so this is, again, pretty familiar for most of us. So we start off with this sort of spam email, which in and of itself, if you take a look, doesn't have a high risk score. It's a spam email, right? So we get tons of these, not a big deal. And what we've got associated with this is a file name, and you can see this over on the right-hand side. We've got this JPEG file. Well, that's sort of interesting. So this thing is saying, hey, discover your, horoscope, blah, 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 some just crummy, junk email that seems to come in. And look, if you categorized this thing as a critical threat, you wouldn't be doing yourself any favors because you probably get a gazillion of these every single day. So in and of itself, again, as an isolated part of the attack chain, not a high risk score. It's a spam email that sort of kicks things off. It's what happens later related to this that starts getting a lot more interesting for us. And so we go to sort of the next phase, which is this possible exploitation. And what we see is what looks to be some sort of a Windows login capability, which means that, something related to the account that this email came down to is looking a little weird. Now, keep in mind, Securonix is very good at handling the user side of things and looking at larger scale, bigger picture user activity in a big environment. So I take this one a lot more seriously, certainly looking at their capability sets and saying, okay, number one, the risk score is certainly higher for this. It doesn't look like a normal login. Something about this seems unusual. So we've got this, email that was sent, and then that account exhibits some sort of shady sort of login activity, which could indicate that account credentials were hijacked, potentially in some way. Okay, well, this is starting to look a lot more interesting. We keep going. So, then you move to this next phase, and again, it's related. It's the endpoint where the user was situated and we saw the login activity. Well, now you've got some really unusual processes that are starting to show up that could potentially be known as malicious or had been seen in other cases that were potentially malicious. And so if you take a look at this, what you see is a chain of events, of course, but progressively more severe risk scoring because it's tying together things that look not so, unusual to, looks a little unusual to, okay, this is probably something that's bad happening as we speak. So you've got a pretty high risk score associated with like sort of known malicious or certainly very suspicious processes that are started. And now, of course, it gets really nasty because you see obvious command and control beaconing that's going out. A lot of that is going to be based on some known vector or factor that the SIEM provider brings to you. In this case, Securonix has seen some of these things, not only just the behavioral element of beaconing. You can look at that as one part of it, but perhaps it's also the place it's beaconing to. Has that been seen before? Or is there something unusual about the domain space that it's trying to beacon out to? So I'm sure some of you guys know it's not at all uncommon to see, sort of like random strings of characters being registered as domains that only live for 10 minutes or something while they get used as command and control vectors for botnets or other attacker scenarios. And maybe that's what sort of caused this. So again, we, sort of go back to this use case and say, the email came in, weird login activity, then it gets really bad because we see unusual processes, and then it's followed by beaconing. Absolutely, this is a really, really high risk score based on that. We definitely see that this is going bad. It's a known attack chain. It's a known case scenario that potentially indicates there's unusual activity. And then we start seeing lateral movement that goes about from this point, right? So now we see this system communicating with others and logging into shares that are in the environment that, really doesn't make any sense for potentially this user to be doing. So you're seeing additional behaviors that mean the attacker has probably gotten access to the box and is now actively doing something as a part of their attack strategy. And beyond that, then of course, again, we see the share access. So here's that showing up. And then, just to sort of finish that out, we see a bigger picture of data exfiltration analysis that shows something that's probably bad. Now, again, this is a test case, so we don't really know exactly what data was going in and out or whatever, but going back to the real world aspect of this, and I look at this as sort of through the lens of an analyst. If you have something like this running continuously in your environment for longer periods of time, right, the longer you run a large scale security analytics platform like this, the better visibility you get to normalcy and abnormalities. And so if there's absolutely no good reason for large data exports to be happening on a normal basis, let alone in conjunction or tied collectively to a user and endpoint that has been involved in other activity that's suspicious or malicious. This is a clear case where you've got something standing out as being potentially bad. And so, is this an after the fact situation? You bet, right? This is us coming in and going, oh my gosh, how bad is it? And probably having to go do damage control. But you have absolutely everything you need to trace yourself back to the initial ingress of what happened, and then start tying that together to really flesh out the entire incident as it occurred. Now, beyond that, as any analyst will tell you, it's great to have pretty dashboards and be able to dig in quickly. What I just walked through with you guys, any analyst could have gotten to in minutes, even seconds if they just wanted to sort of click their way to happiness there. But in minutes, I have a pretty clear understanding of this attack chain because Securonix is piecing that together in the background and stitching together that whole incident for me. But as an analyst, I got to get more detail, right? I got to dig down into some of this stuff. And so what I looked at was the process initiation phase. So that's, a couple phases back from the end goal of the attacker, but it's after that initial unusual activity log on that we saw, and I saw some of these weird processes. I'm like, I got to get a sense of sort of what's going on with that. And so I can immediately dig into that right in the dashboard, going back to that phase, clicking on it, and then seeing, and it might be tough. There's a lot of stuff that's sort of on this slide, but you can see, who it's associated with. You can see where it was started. You can see, the device that it was actually seen on. You can see the source of this. In this case, we're using CrowdStrike as an endpoint agent that feeds a lot of this detail in. I think, pretty much any major EDR type platform or tool is going to be very useful and valid in getting that deep dive detail on an endpoint. So whatever yours might be, you're hoping to get this kind of detail out of it. But I need to get a sense of where this is, what was seen, how it's being used, what's going on afterward. And the more detail I can get, the better off I'm going to be. And so naturally now, as an analyst, I need to find out, hey, where else could these kind of things be going on in the environment? Maybe this isn't an isolated incident. Maybe this is something that has been more widespread than I realized. And so I'm going to go do some threat hunting and investigation. Rock and roll. Securonix has one of the tools built into their platform called Spotter that allows us to do some really cool text search capabilities across the entire data set, and can start linking things together and even visualizing them. So going back to our incident, I'm like, okay, wait, I need to know where that initial source email might have gone. And so here I go. I do a really quick, cool search on the file name, which if you go all the way back to that initial event was digidec.jpg. And I'm going to link that with the email sender, email subject, and email recipient that's associated with any times it's been seen in the environment. And you can see what spits out. So now I've got potentially a listing of where this went beyond just the one user that was involved in the case I just described. And that might help me go track down some additional capabilities or some additional potential ingress scenarios that may have occurred, or help people, find this before it becomes a problem. So we pivoted out of the top violators and the user and the related user activities into what's known as the investigative workbench or the investigation workbench, which means we can start pivoting around, drilling down to perform some of this root cause analysis, and then of course, look to see whether or not it was found in other places in the environment. So again, as an investigation process, I need all of these things together and I need them to be able to happen quickly. And so here's my investigation workbench. I went and dug down in and started finding some interesting things. And so in this particular case, I sort of shifted gears and started looking at some other types of things that were found in the environment. And, I looked at like a top violator, who's been seen in numerous things. What types of events have shown up with the same user involved a couple different times? And so here I've got this user. And so you can see, Brendan Franklin is sort of the user that's involved here. And what I now want to find out is, what kinds of things were associated with this user? How could I pivot from just the user that shows up in the top violators down into some additional investigation of the types of things that were seen and the details of those? And so the investigation workbench, really cool for that. And you can see it'll show me things that are related. And now I can start looking at things that, might be relevant for additional, threat hunting or investigation. So I want to know about things like network addresses that were seen in association with that user. I want to see sessions that were associated with that user in those activities over a particular time period. So there's another tool that's associated with the platform called Session View that allows me to basically track an entire activity set for an entity over an entire 24-hour period. So I'm like, okay, I got an account that's misbehaving. And what I don't want to have to do is go hunt and peck my way through everything, one to the next, to the next, to the next. Just show me everything that went on with that account. If I've got some suspicion or hunch that there's a problem with the account, I want to just see all of it in one place. That's exactly what we see here. So the session view shows us that sort of bigger picture, and we can then dive into any of the things that are shown there. So you've got all these different ways of doing things. And that's what I liked is just the ability to sort of, pivot from, hey, this looks interesting, to some details, to, hey, this user's doing things, to what have they done over 24 hours, to, all of the other types of things that a security operations team would want. To sort of move into the last part of my discussion here on the review that we did, I, as I mentioned earlier, we did look at some of the security automation capabilities that, start moving us towards SOAR, or orchestration and automated response. And they've got a few really cool capabilities here that I'm just going to highlight quickly, because I love having all of this in one place. And the first is, of course, the response playbooks. And so you've got the ability to piece together or completely build from scratch incident playbooks that you can say, okay, look, something triggered the initial sort of incident or case. And based on that happening, I want to automate through the use of API integration a vulnerability scan, and then maybe take some of the things I find to feed the virus total. And then, hypothetically, if I get a specific response back from that, block an IP address that's being communicated with. So you have to come up with your own playbook cases here, depending on what your risk tolerance is. But having the integration with all these other tools, and you can see here, we've got ServiceNow, we've got Nessus, we've got VirusTotal, we've got some proxies that we can integrate with. All those are integrated. So if you want to build a playbook that automates that all happening, you can. I don't have to go, one tool to another to try to sort of coordinate that if I don't want to. Another cool thing that they have is called ResponseBot, which is essentially their service that's a huge data engine that says, hey, look, we've seen these things happen before, and here's some suggestions on how to remediate that based on what we've seen in the past. I'll take all the good advice I can get. You don't have to take the advice, but ResponseBot is useful, especially if you're dealing with a limited team size or even a limited skill set in your team, where you can use some advice based on massive processing of things that have been noted and seen in the industry and across your environment and even other customers' environments too. And so this is cool. It's, again, just a, almost sort of like an expert system that can advise you on actions to take or next steps as part of your investigations. The final piece, which I naturally would expect in any sort of enterprise class SIEM product, would be case management. And so that's going to integrate with pretty much every major case management platform or ticketing platform out there, ServiceNow, Remedy, those kind of guys. Because what I need to be able to do is initiate a ticket or even be able to update cases coming from tickets in a seamless fashion. And every SOC team is going to be using some sort of case management tools or platforms. You really need your SIEM to align with that. So to wrap up and just sort of give you my overall take of things, this was a lot of fun. I actually had a great time going through this review because the product is easy to get used to. In fact, I can tell you right now, I was in this product and going through use cases and actually testing things and enjoying myself within minutes. So super easy to use, really great capability set. The spectrum of things that these guys offer is just great. It's phenomenal for any team that would use these kinds of tools. And their scalability is, certainly something that you should look at on your own. But based on what I saw, they can handle the data for sure. They also integrate with lots of cloud service providers and other service offerings. And they have 100% cloud-based offerings in their Securonix cloud as well. So if you don't want to do on-premise stuff and you really want to get away from installing hardware and so on, that is also an option. So thanks for listening to me, and I'm going to hand that over to Nitin now.
Thank you, Dave. That was a great presentation. So Dave covered the different capabilities of the product. Excuse me. So what I want to do is, the topic of the webinar was taking your SIM to the cloud, right? So we talked about some of the capabilities of Securonix SIM from a data collection, analytics, investigation, and response perspective. So now in the subsequent slides, I'm going to talk about when you are thinking about taking your SIM to the cloud or doing the SaaS-based SIM, what are some of the considerations you need to take into account, and what are some of the benefits of doing that? Okay, sorry. So when you talk about a SaaS-based service, right, whether it is SIM in cloud or any SaaS service, some of the obvious benefits are quick time to value, right? You don't have to worry about procuring hardware, deploying the hardware in your environment. You can just plug in and get your service up and running. There's less operational overhead when you deploy something in cloud. The vendor takes care of all the operational aspects, the management, the monitoring of the infrastructure. So that saves time of your resources and ultimately cost for you. It's elastic, so you can scale up and down as needed in cloud without having to, again, worry about procuring new hardware or having redundant hardware. And then cost. If you look at from a total cost of ownership perspective, the savings that you achieve in terms of the hardware cost, in terms of the time you're saving, in terms of the resource utilization, overall, the total cost of ownership of cloud services is always going to be much more beneficial than a on-prem deployment. So those are some of the obvious benefits of cloud. But then there are also, certain considerations, right? So as you're thinking about moving to cloud, you're always worried about a few things when you think about a cloud-based SIM or a cloud-based cybersecurity product, right? So I'm going to walk through three key considerations for a cloud SIM, right? So the first thing is security, right? When you're trying to do a cybersecurity as a service, right, you're always worried about what about the security of the data, right? Because I'm going to send some of the data and events that are sensitive into the cloud. Now, how do I trust the cloud vendor, right? So the number one thing you need to look into is the cloud vendor SOC 2 Type 2 certified, right? And what that means is if you are SOC 2 Type 2 certified, you have gone through the analysis of encryption, role-based access control, and so on. So, because when you think about a cloud-based solution, there is a hosting provider, like a public cloud provider, and then there is the vendor, the application provider. For example, in the case of Securonix, we are hosting in AWS. So AWS provides some inherent security controls for their infrastructure, and then Securonix provides controls for the application that we're hosting. And those controls are for data in motion, like encryption, and for data at rest, like, again, encryption at rest if you need that, and also role-based access controls and so on. So what you want to do is ask your SaaS vendor to provide you evidence that they have the right controls in place as far as security is concerned. And one of the things you can ask for is the SOC 2 Type 2 report, which will validate that they have gone through the rigorous testing of all the security controls, and they do regular pen tests of their environment and so on. The next consideration for a lot of companies is, where is my data going to be hosted? What does cloud mean, right? Is this data going to be in the US? Is it going to be sitting somewhere else? And especially now for multinational companies with GDPR, it's even more of a problem or a concern, right? So the question you want to ask your vendor is, how flexible is your cloud? Are you hosting the data in the US? Are you hosting the data locally for your customers in EMEA, and so on, right? So in our case, in case of Securonix, we provide the flexibility for the customers to choose the region they want to host their data in. And the reason why we can do that is also because since you're hosting on AWS, and AWS, as you know, is worldwide, we do have an option of providing the customers the flexibility of deploying in region. The other thing is with government, right? They're looking for something that's FedRAMP certified. And again, so the question to ask to your SaaS vendor is, do they have a solution that can be hosted in Gulf Cloud, right? So the next consideration is when you think about cloud, you always think about multi-tenancy, right? And multi-tenancy helps vendors keep the cost down. And what it means is you have infrastructure that's shared. So all your computing resources are shared. However, the data and the application that is hosted on that on the multi-tenant architecture is dedicated to you, right? So it's almost like an apartment building where you're sharing the common infrastructure, but you have your own room. Now, in some cases, customers don't really care about cost as much as they care about having their own independent tenant. So another consideration here is, do you want to be in a multi-tenant environment, and are you okay with that level of security, or do you want your own dedicated tenant? Now, to be honest, what we've seen is majority of the customers will be okay with the multi-tenant deployment because it's still segregating you from everybody else. But in case you have strict policies where everything needs to be in your own environment, and you want to treat this as a extension of your environment with a dedicated tenant, then you do have an option to do that. The next aspect is operations, right? So who is going to have access to my data? It's sitting in cloud, it's outside of my environment. I want to know, are there external parties or even the vendor, the operations team of the vendor, are they going to have access to my data? And that is a key consideration, right? So now, the question to ask the vendor is, how are you managing my application and the operations of my application? Who gets access to my data? Now, in case of Securonix, we have built an application outside of the SIEM application, and we call it SNYPR, which is interacting with the application to gather all the statistics around the operations data. And our operations team is then looking at SNYPR console to manage and monitor your application. So our operations team never has access to your data or your environment directly. All they're doing is using this monitoring tool to look at statistics of data, not the real data or actual data at all, right? And that's a key consideration for when you think about a cloud SIEM or a cloud-based product. And then, so all of these concerns that I talked about, from the security with SOC 2, GDPR, multi-tenancy, who has access to your data, these are all legit concerns. Now, there are certain concerns that people have, which probably are not a concern if you think about it a little bit, right? For example, when you're thinking about moving your SIEM to cloud, you're moving your data to cloud. Okay, you are doing that. But if you're already deploying Office 365 or Salesforce, or you've already adopted cloud-based applications, your data is already in cloud. So by moving your SIEM to cloud, you're not introducing an additional risk. The data is already sitting in cloud. In fact, you're simplifying your process by now having this cloud SIEM directly interact with your cloud applications through APIs and pull the data in from cloud to cloud, versus having it traverse to your on-prem environment and then move elsewhere. And then if you also think a little bit more, right, if you have adopted cloud applications, and if you've adopted a cloud-first strategy, you also probably have some security in cloud. And, because if you have a cloud-based application like Office 365, you probably have Azure AD or Okta as a single sign-on solution sitting in front of that. You probably have a CASB that you've deployed. So you already have security solutions that are sitting in cloud with your data in cloud. So moving your SIEM to cloud is not a new risk that you're introducing. It's actually adding more efficiency and providing you that cloud-to-cloud integration to save cost and improve efficiency of monitoring. So the next consideration is, when you think about a SaaS-based solution, is a lot of vendors, and every vendor actually will say, "Hey, yeah, we do cloud." What does that really mean? Or when we say SaaS SIEM, right? What Securonix means by that is we have a SaaS-based SIEM offering where we provide you a hosted solution in AWS, where Securonix will manage and monitor the application for you and provide you the service, right? Now, in some cases, you may have vendors that support that through an MSSP, and they'll say, yeah, we support cloud. However, we don't manage it. Our MSSP manages the environment for you. Now, here are a couple of things to consider when you have a third party managing your application versus the vendor that is providing the SaaS solution. Number one, do you have access to the latest software, right? So if it is a third party involved, is that, is there that fluency of getting to the latest and greatest access to the latest and greatest version of the software, right? Are you going to get that immediately, or are you going to be 3 or 4 versions behind because there is a third party involved and there's a process involved in getting the latest content there? And secondly, from a support perspective, again, what about subject matter expertise, right? Does the third party have the same level of subject matter expertise as a vendor would have, right? So those are some of the considerations to look at when you're talking about a SaaS, which is truly a SaaS provided by the vendor versus a SaaS that is outsourced to a third party. We talked about hosting in public cloud. I think that's critical, not just from a security perspective. With AWS, you get all the inherent security built into AWS. You get all the reliability built into AWS because of all the SLAs you already have. So you know that environment is going to be stable. You know that environment is going to be secure, and most importantly, that environment is accessible from anywhere. So as you think about your SaaS, you also should think about, is it hosted in a public cloud or is it hosted in a private cloud where, may have challenges with stability and performance and accessibility. We talked about multi-tenancy versus dedicated tenant. It is, again, a decision for you to make. As I said, most customers go with a multi-tenant environment. It's optimized for cost and still provides you the logical segregation. But if your security policies don't allow you to do that, then you can also look at a dedicated tenant option. And then the last bullet here is security monitoring options, right? So when you think about SaaS, right, there's one thing where you have a hosted solution, the application is hosted, the use cases are in place, and the alerts are triggered. Now, who is monitoring the alerts, right? Now, a SaaS provider will provide you provide you all the services, and then you go in and you monitor your alerts, right? That's how the model works. But if you want to fully outsource this and you want a fully managed solution, not just from a application perspective, but also from a monitoring perspective, again, you want to evaluate whether the vendor provides that option. So with Securonix, you do have that option. We do provide security monitoring options as well. Where now you have a fully managed solution, and all you have to worry about is escalation on alerts that are high severity versus going in and looking at every alert 24/7. And then the last consideration is, are you getting a lesser SIM because you're going to SaaS? And the reason why this is important is there have been SaaS-based SIM offerings from other vendors, and I won't name them, but in some cases you have a SIM in cloud, but the UBA is sitting on-prem, or you have the opposite of that scenario where the vendor is saying, hey, the SIM is going to be on-prem, but we'll have our UBA in cloud. And that doesn't help you, right? When you're going with a SaaS SIM or a cloud SIM solution, you want a full package SIM that is providing you the SIM capabilities, the analytics capabilities, the orchestration capabilities, all in a single platform as a service. Otherwise, it doesn't get you the benefits you're looking for. If you have something on-prem, then you still have to worry about the hardware, you still have to worry about the operations, you still have to worry about the cost. So it's not really solving much of your problem. So you do want to look into, when you're looking at a SaaS SIM solution, is it a exact replica of your on-prem solution in cloud, or are there components that are in cloud? In which case, you might not get all the benefits of going with a cloud SIM. The other benefit from a cloud SIM perspective, so we talk about, quick time to value, cost, operations, but one thing that's not talked enough about in cloud SIM is the auto deployment of use cases. With SIM, as you know, or even with cybersecurity, the threats are evolving, and they're evolving every day. There's a new breach that happens every other day. Right? And what you want to make sure is you have the latest and greatest use case content deployed to catch these breaches, to catch these attacks and breaches. Right? Now, with Securonix Cloud SIEM, one of the benefits we're providing to the customers, which is core for us, is being able to deploy these use cases and threat models in real time. So as we develop, our threat research team is developing these use cases within 24 hours. We are able to deploy these use cases and content in our cloud environment and make that content available to our customers. So they have access to the latest threat models and the latest use cases to be able to detect the latest and greatest attacks. And that is, a big issue with on-prem, because, even if I make the use case available as a vendor for you guys to deploy it, you need to understand the use cases, you need to test the use cases, you need to tune the use cases and then deploy it. And that could be a process. So with a cloud-based SIEM, that process is taken care of also by the SIEM vendor. And you want to make sure that whichever SIEM you're going with, you have that commitment from the vendor. Now, the next two bullets that you have here are a webinar by themselves. So I'll cover them briefly here, and then we'll have a follow-up webinar on those topics. So when you go into cloud, well, obviously the benefits of cloud, we talked about those in terms of resources and cost savings and so on. But the other benefit is cloud-to-cloud monitoring. If you have a cloud-first strategy, or if you have a strategy where you're migrating as much of applications to cloud, you want your SIEM to be ready to integrate with these cloud applications directly. So you're not trying to figure out how to send data to your cloud vendor, and not having to figure out how to integrate that data with your on-prem log management and then provide it to your cloud vendor. So that cloud-to-cloud integration is critical, and that's one of the biggest differentiators for us as a cloud SIEM provider. We have integrations with hundreds of cloud applications through APIs, where we can pull in the data directly, seamlessly from these applications and perform analytics on top of that data. So on the right-hand side, we've listed some of the strategic partners that we work with. But as I said, the list is more than 100 vendors, and that keeps growing. Right? So one is monitoring of your cloud applications and infrastructure, right? And the other aspect is integration with other cloud security ecosystem vendors, right? And why that's important is, A, they become a source of data. As you know, SIEM is a nerve center of security, right? So you're bringing in data not just from your applications and network, but you're also bringing in data from your security data sources. So that cloud security ecosystem helps you bring data from other cloud security products like Gatsby's, CrowdStrike, for example, from endpoints and so on. Now that data is, you perform analytics on that data. You use that data in threat chains, the threat chain that Dave showed you, and help prioritize certain threats based on those indicators. The second is from a context perspective, that data helps you enrich your events, right? Enrich your events with contextual information that you need from a threat intelligence perspective, from an asset perspective. So for example, if I'm integrating with ServiceNow, I can bring in asset information from ServiceNow and use that as contextual data for my analytics. And then the last aspect is SOAR, right? So you have done the integrations, you have done the analytics. Now you're thinking about response, and by integration with the cloud security solutions, say like Okta, for example, in our case, we can do step-up authentication, or we can block a certain user based on suspicious behavior patterns. So as you evaluate your cloud SIEM solutions, in addition to the infrastructure components and security components, you also should think about capabilities components, from a complete SIEM to what kind of security monitoring they're providing in cloud, and what kind of ecosystem they have for integration with other cloud vendors. So if you look at a Securonix Cloud SIEM solution, As I said, we are providing you the complete SIEM capabilities from security data lake for collection of all your data with the Hadoop platform at scale, to the analytics capabilities, to the security orchestration and response capabilities, right? And all of this is hosted in AWS, which is public cloud, managed by Securonix and monitored by Securonix. So you have access to our SMEs and our content directly. Our environment is SOC 2 Type 2 certified. So we have all the security controls in place to make sure your data is secure. And we have the most comprehensive cloud-to-cloud monitoring and integration service so that you can integrate directly with your cloud applications and cloud security systems to provide you that seamless monitoring experience. So I'm going to skip this slide and just go to the last slide, which is around the case studies. And this is one case study, just a very quick one on a real estate company that is using Securonix Cloud SIEM. So the way we are seeing Cloud SIEM deployed is you have data sources that are in cloud. In this case, Google Apps, CrowdStrike, Ping Federate. So we are using API integrations directly to bring this data into Securonix. And then you have some data sources that are going to be on-prem, right? You don't migrate everything overnight to cloud. So you have your Windows firewall proxy data that we are ingesting through a remote ingester. So we have a lightweight ingester that sits on your on-prem environment and takes data from your on-prem and sends it to our Securonix Cloud environment. And in the Securonix Cloud environment, then you have all the processing of data, analytics, and that's where you have your monitoring done, right? Now, the key benefits, I'll list out only two here. Number one, for this customer, the deployment time, they were estimating months of deployments if they did this on-prem. In case of cloud, it's a matter of 1 or 2 or 3 days, right? So within a week, you will have your cloud environment or Cloud SIEM deployed and ready. And number two is so that's the saving upfront in terms of time and time to value. And then secondly, from a monitoring perspective, in this case, this customer is saving 60 to 70% of resource time. So if there were 2 people required or 3 people required, now you have 1 or 1.5% required, and they're doing their own monitoring. So you're cutting down the security operations and monitoring cost by 60 to 70% by adopting a cloud-based solution, and you're not compromising on any capabilities. So definitely something to look into and consider. So with that, let me pass it back to Carol. I know we've got a couple of minutes left. I don't know if you have enough time for questions, but Carol, back to you.
All right, thanks so much. I do think we have a couple minutes here. We'll try and get to a few of these. Our first question is, does this SIEM show the source of the alert, or does it have its own sensors?
It will show the source of the alert, yes.
All right, thank you. Does this interface automatically, it's not quite phrased correctly, let's see. They're asking about evaluate the reputation of the file. And we can have the attendee clarify that. Okay, if you're not sure, we can have the attendee clarify that.
Yeah, that would be good.
Okay, all right, I'll ask them to do that. Does this use AI or machine learning to detect the threats?
Yes. So one of the key elements.
Use AI or machine. My apologies.
Yeah. So Securonix does use. The core of Securonix's analytics engine is machine learning. So we use unsupervised and supervised machine learning to detect advanced threats. AI is, it's a fancy term. A lot of people use that term. Realistically, it's still very, very new. We have incorporated certain elements of AI into our solution, but I wouldn't say we have 100% handle on how AI should be used in security, and I don't think anybody else has.
All right, thanks. And that attendee's question, he said he responded, was answered in a slide, so we're good to go on that one. All right, one last question. To send logs from Office 365 to Securonix, do we need to have any specific subscription level?
No. So we have we have built an API, so all we need is a certain credentials that we can request from you to be able to do the API integration. So you don't need any special or any special level of access from your Office 365 provider. We take care of that on our end.
All right, thanks. Well, with that, we are out of time. Thank you so much, Dave and Nitin, for your great presentation, and to Securonix for sponsoring this webcast, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcast. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.